So this is going to be a slideshow of the pictures that I took during my time in the Falkland Islands. And as we can see by this first photo, it's basically a photograph of the sky. Might not seem much, but the wonderful sort of scenery that you got there always, I thought, deserved a photo. You can see these wonderful array of colours and wispy clouds that just seem to form quite naturally. Well, you do get them anywhere in the world, really, but in the Falkland Islands they did seem to be quite spectacular sometimes. At sunset, and as this next one shows, at sunrise, you got some wonderful images that would sort of just really stand out. And as I say, I always had my camera with me, ready to take photos such as this one. It's almost a very pastel-y sort of colour scheme that seems to sweep across the sky. And here we have the area that I worked in, which was in a mountain environment covered in snow, and here the same environment, but the mountains in the background have a rolling clouds seem to have enveloped them, so you can't quite see, but again there, that's cloud covering just over the tops of the mountains, which I thought was unusual, but doesn't seem to show up too well on the photo. And here's another sunrise photo. The sort of dark and shadowy foreground, and the lighted background, which just seems to be slightly different to what you would normally have. Working night shifts, I got the opportunity to take these photographs at sunset and sunrise. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to. As you can see, I took quite a lot of them, not all of them special, but all of them sort of very peaceful to look at. These are the photographs that I took from a ride in a Seeking helicopter that I managed to get. Just to give you an idea of what sort of the landscape looks like from above, really. I just sort of sat by the window and snapped lots of pictures here just to get an idea of everything. You can see some very sort of bizarre shaped shorelines here, and the flat sort of landscape that you see, and lots of little small islands that are just out to sea, and the islands themselves are made up of lots of small islands, but there are two main islands, both inhabited. And I believe this was the West Falkland Island, where you see a little farm just there. Not a lot of access, just a small road. And again, in the shoreline I forget which one of the two main islands this was, but I believe it was the East Falkland Island. And as you can see, a very sort of grey landscape. There is green, but it's a very dull green. It's mostly moss rather than grass, and not a tree to be seen, as you can see. We did get the chance to see some penguins, which you might not quite make out on these photographs. This was one of the many beaches that the penguins sort of sat around and did their thing on, really. And yeah, this was me trying to be artistic. You can see some seagulls beneath us, but they don't really show up very well on the photograph there. A few more sort of very contrasting colorscapes there, with the bright blue on the left and then the dull green on the bottom right there. And here you can't quite see them, but those dots in the background are actually penguins. They sort of, as I say, just sit around on the beach, not doing a lot. And this is one of my favourite photographs that I've ever taken. Just the sheer explosion of blue and grey and white there. I love it. And another one. We actually stopped to hover at this point when the pilot thought he saw a dolphin. I don't think there was a dolphin, but he was sure. So he stopped the helicopter so we could have a look for it. But nobody saw it but the pilot. And here you can, those are the penguins there on the middle right sort of area of the screen. They are running away from the sound of the helicopter. This is a ship that was in the harbour itself at Port Stanley. I forget the name of it, but I believe it's blown over now in storms. And here is the main airport at Port Stanley, which was occupied by the Argentinians during the initial stages of the conflict. It was the only airport at the time. And a shot of Port Stanley from the distance there, still on board the helicopter, obviously. Some more shots of sunset, of a pinky, sort of peachy coloured sky in contrast to the grey. And just me sort of snapping away from, this was from my room, I believe. These wooden buildings here were where we stayed. And here was the return journey home. I'm not sure these photographs are in chronological order, but this is the return journey home, where I was sort of, as we were sort of passing away from the sunset, I decided to try and get some artistic sort of photographs in. And you can see there is the sort of flying above the earth. I'm not entirely sure where, somewhere just north of the equator, I believe. I just started snapping at the sunset, sort of. It's not really a sunset, is it? As you're flying away from the sun, and you're just sort of passing over the earth as the sun disappears behind you. And I was trying to get the perfect shot, but obviously the sun was too bright at this point, so you're getting a lot of glare from the sun setting there over the wing of the aircraft. And then as the sun started to dip below the horizon, the photos got a little clearer, and clearer still. And again, just snapping away. Probably took too many photos here, and just to give you an idea of how many I had to take to try and get that ideal shot. And that's in front of the wing, so I tried getting it without the sun in the shot to see if there was no glare. And then we got the perfect shot, which I think is brilliant. Unfortunately, over the years of transferring the file on the computers, there's a lot of digital noise build-up that I can't seem to get rid of. But yeah, I did love that picture. And then you get as a darker sort of environment as the sun disappeared completely. Yes, this is not chronological order because this is back on the island, and there's a destroyed Argentinian jet, which is a bit of a reminder as to why we were in the Falkland Islands. This was probably shot down by a Harrier during the conflict, but yeah, that was another wreckage of an Argentinian jet that must have maybe claimed the life of a soldier. And here, I believe this was used as a hospital during the conflict. I didn't actually take this photo myself. This was taken by someone else. And again, from a different angle, yes, I believe this was a hospital that was used and just sort of left for disrepair over the years. And you'll recognise this photo from my introduction screens that I've started doing. A place called Gypsy's Cove, I believe it was called. And there is another one. The signpost in the foreground there says, although we believe this beach to be clear of landmines and ordnance, it might not be clear, so walk on it at your own risk. And there, a little penguin hiding away there in his little hole, as they often did. And geese, lots of those about. And the chicks were starting to hatch just before I left the island. And another shot of that ship there in the harbour from ground level this time. And now we come to the photographs that everybody seems to love whenever I show them, is the penguins that we saw. Again, I believe this was called Bertha's Beach. I'm not entirely sure on the name, but we walked across it for quite some miles until we saw these penguins all just sort of milling around. And don't be fooled, it's definitely not a hot sunny day. It was a very windy and cold day, but it was very strange to see penguins on sand. That is sand and not snow. And we got as close as we could to them, but they ended up coming to us, as you'll see by these photos here, as they got gradually closer. And then I found myself kneeling in the sand, trying to get them to come closer, and this was about as close as I got. Those indentations in the sand were where one of my friends had posed for a photograph. I'm afraid that is it for now. Be sure to comment or like if you've enjoyed this, if you found it relaxing, and I'll be sure to do some more videos soon. Suggestions of any type would be greatly appreciated. So thank you for watching, and bye bye for now.